I encourage readers to consider that despite everything we may face, to never give up on life, on ourselves, nor to lose faith in our ability to transform. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional here. And then this. I feel it is fitting to conclude that all we truly want and need is to connect, to love and be loved, and to be witnessed in our essence, our true nature, our humanity, and our Welcome to the world of energy, where science meets spirit. Ancient wisdom merges with cutting-edge knowledge, and the possibilities for a healthier, happier you are endless. I'm Lauren Walker.
And I'm Blaine Wilkes. This is Energy Works, your portal into the incredible world of energy medicine. Whether you're a seasoned energy practitioner seeking to deepen your knowledge or someone new to the concept of energy medicine, this podcast was created for you. Together, we unravel the intricate threads of energy that weave through our lives, revealing practical insights, stories, and actionable tools you can start using right away.
Join us on this captivating journey through the world of energy right here and learn how energy works. Hi everyone, Lauren here, back with another episode of Cool People, Big Ideas. And wow, this interview coming up, I don't even know what to say about it. It was hard, I'm not going to lie. I was really nervous about interviewing Mary Jo Fetterly. I met Mary Jo decades ago when I was in a really rough place in my life as well. I had just lost my yoga studio in a really brutal situation that was kind of traumatizing. And I moved out of the country, moved up to Canada, and was really excited for this fresh start. I was going to take a break from teaching yoga, and I had found a yoga teacher to study with who is absolutely phenomenal. And I couldn't have been more excited. She was the real deal. Her name is Mary Jo Fetterly, and I got to meet her and take a class or two with her and was just all in. This was the teacher that I was going to study with for the next chunk of my life. But life had other plans for both of us. And within a couple of months of my moving to Nelson, British Columbia, Mary Jo, who I had just met and only just started to get to know, was in a horrible ski accident and was airlifted out of this small town, and after she had broken C3, 4, 5 and became paralyzed and became a quadriplegic. And that incident in this small town, it really rocked the town. I remember going to prayer vigils. I remember just the shock of this small mountain community from this pillar of this community, this yoga teacher who was everyone's friend and everyone's champion. And all of a sudden now she was in a place that none of us could even imagine or wanted to. And I never saw her again. And I didn't even really know her that well at the time. So it wasn't like I could follow up with her. She was just gone. And so not only did I give up teaching yoga, I also gave up skiing after that accident, which was and still remains one of my biggest loves of my life. But I was so horrified by that accident that I just stopped. I stopped skiing for years. And I eventually left that town and eventually started to teach yoga again. And years and years and years later, I started to hear little whispers about this woman, this paralyzed yogi, and so started to see that she had an Instagram account, or before that a Facebook account, and started to see that she was still teaching yoga. and still out there in the world. And I still didn't reach out to her because I was just one of her students from years ago, and I never really had a deep relationship with her, even though I had felt so strongly about her as a teacher and as a person. And then we finally connected a couple of years ago and kept wanting to, by email, and kept wanting to do something together, just have some conversations, maybe be on a podcast or something. But neither of us had that at the time. And we just knew we wanted to connect, but we still never spoke live. And then she wrote a book. And she actually reached out to me for some advice at different times of the writing process. And then she reached out to me when it was finished and published. Here is the cover right now. It's called Where Science Meets Spirit, the autobiography of a paralyzed yogi. And it is incredible. It is an incredible book. And she is an incredible woman and an incredible yoga teacher. And I'm so glad that we finally got the chance to connect. We did a podcast that you are going to hear right now that is absolutely mind-blowing. Everything you think you knew about yoga, everything you think you knew about paralysis, everything you think you knew about a life-changing experience is going to be challenged in this interview. And after this interview, about a week later, I got to finally see Mary Jo live again in real life. I drove to her home in Vancouver, British Columbia, and she hugged me so hard. I couldn't even believe that she was in a wheelchair. She is a phenom and a huge inspiration. And I'm really excited for you to hear what she has to say. I encourage you to get her book and to listen to this podcast and allow yourself to be transported in ways you never thought would happen. It's really remarkable. She is a gift, and I'm so glad that we have rekindled our friendship, and who knows what will come from that. I have a feeling you'll see more of me and Mary Jo together in the future. But for now, sit back, buckle up, and get ready to hear an incredible story. Welcome, Mary Jo, and I'm just really excited to talk with you today, to talk about your new book and to talk about all things yoga and energy. And I want to set the stage a little bit for this incredible book, which you all can see. There's like pages notated already. It's already highlighted all the way through. This is Mary Jo Fetterly's book, Where Science Meets Spirit, the autobiography of a paralyzed yogi. I met Mary Jo. I met you in the fall of 2003. I had just moved up to Nelson, and I was so excited for so many reasons, but very close to the top, I'm going to say in the top 3, was you, because I met you, and had I taken 1 or 2 yoga classes when I was kind of going up and back and forth to Nelson, getting ready to move there. And you are the real deal yogi. And I was so excited to finally have a teacher that I could study with, who was so wise, so skilled, so generous of heart and spirit and lovely and kind. And I knew all that from the brief time that I spent with you. It might have been like after class. I can still remember it was the second floor studio, and the studio was in the back, and then some changing room with the offices right in the. And I remember speaking with you and being so excited, and you were just so lovely, and I was just bursting, so happy to be there and study with you. And that was in the late fall, early winter of 2003. And literally I had maybe taken 1 or 2 classes with you. That's it. I didn't really know you at all. I was just at the lotus feet of my teacher, which was you, going to be my teacher for a long, long time. And that's not what happened, because a month and a half later, you had this ski accident that changed your life. And I did not see you again. I went to a prayer vigil right after the accident, And then we heard, because that's
Mm.
all it was, we were hearing, there was no internet, all that stuff, or there was internet, but not all the,
Mhm.
So we had heard that you
Yeah.
got moved to Vancouver, and that was it. I never saw you again. I never heard from you again until many, 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 many years later. And in fact, I looked back today and saw that it was 2021 when I reached out to you and I said, I don't know if you remember me at all, but
Wow.
I saw your post on this other thing and I just want to reach out to you. So that was many years later. And I'm so grateful for you being here today with me, with us, all of us here on Cool People, Big Ideas. And I just want
Well,
to
thank you.
turn this over to you now and have you set the stage for what happened after I met you and got to have one or two amazing yoga classes with you. And then that was it.
Mm.
Our lives both just went in different directions.
Yeah, I remember talking to you about your life too at the time. I don't know what it was in the stars, but there was a lot of things going on for sure. Well, thank you,
Yeah.
Lauren. I remember that time absolutely directly. I can palpate that excitement in you, and also that deep, earnest heart for the yoga and the real teachings. And as a matter of fact, when I was in Nelson last week to do a book signing, I took a picture of that stairway up to that studio. I don't know why I did, but I'm like, I got to take a picture of 444 Baker. It was the very first place I taught kind of officially. So that was kind of fun. And I have that picture. We can put it up with the podcast if you want. You remember
Nice.
the little
Nice.
little door and there was three flights of little rickety stairs. I never would have got up
I
there in my
do.
wheelchair nowadays, but I did do that once
No.
actually. Um,
Wow.
yeah. So yeah, that kind of that takes me back. So after I'd gone after a lot of Iyengar training in the 80s and 90s. Of course, my mom was a yoga teacher and her teacher is Swami Radha, who you will meet, you probably have met in the book. And the Yashodhara ashram is on the east shore of the Kootenai Lake. Um, and if we go back to the late 60s, early 70s, when my mom met her, she had very bad scoliosis, my mom. And so she'd gone to this kind of, off the wall, back class at the YWCA in Kamloops, where I grew up. And Donna Martin was the yoga teacher there, and she was kind of calling it movement back, back health movement class, because you weren't allowed to call anything yoga in those days. It was, you'd get burnt at the stake or something like that. And so my mom kind of tiptoed into those classes around my dad, who was very, very Roman Catholic. And so we were raised that way. And when she felt like this was really helping her, Donna said to her, "You're really good at this, Ruth. I have to be away next week. Could you take over the class for me?" And my mom, Ruth, said, "Okay." Anyway, she did a couple classes and loved it. And then when Donna got back, Mom was like, "Where did you go?" And Donna had gone down to train in the Radha House in Victoria. There was only a couple in Canada at the time. And Swami Radha was this incredible woman. She was German by origin and by birth, and she had been basically abandoned by her parents. She scrummed along in the streets of Germany for years until she figured out a way to survive. She ended up in England doing domestic work and worked for this very, very lovely couple. And they could see how bright she was, and so he kept bringing her books and feeding her information of esoteric things and Eastern studies. Anyway, long story short, from there she ended up in Montreal. Um, and she was a professional dancer for a number of years. Swami Radha then, in those days, Shirley, she was lost two husbands. She was never married, lost two husbands, and was devastated. Ended up going to a Shivananda yoga meditation class in Montreal, which is where kind of a lot of the early studies were. Satyananda, his student. Anyway, she went there and immediately fell in love with it. And after a couple of sessions, someone said to her, you need to go see Shivananda. And she's like, what? I've never been to India. I don't know what to do. Anyway, long story short, she got to the banks of the Ganges and Shivananda saw her and said, Shirley, Radha, I've been waiting for you. And down she went onto the platform where they do their ceremonies. And for 15 years, she studied with him. So when she came back, she was my mom's yoga teacher. And when my mom went down and studied with her in Victoria for the first time, she was absolutely like any of us are when we, are lucky enough to be at the feet of a master. We're absolutely transmuted and somewhat transfixed, maybe a little. Anyway, so long story short, that was my mom's beginning. That was my imprinting. I I had a lot of that in my early days, and then of course, like many teens, kind of went my way. But when I came back to that through studying Iyengar yoga, I loved Iyengar, but it was lacking some of the deeper spiritual aspects and energy aspects. It was kind of stale. So then I studied the very first days of Ashtanga with David Swenson and Tim Miller and Richard Freeman, and then I got that training, and that's where you would have bumped into me, because I love the fact that it was moving energy, because Ashtanga was kind of the first practice that in North America anyway, that we were getting from India, that really took into account Kriya, bandhas, pranayam, various different things, and Ashtanga also even mantra. So I love the traditional form of the Ashtanga Vinyasa flow yoga. And that's kind of what I brought to Nelson, and that's what you came to in those days. So that was that, beginnings. And then as I evolved, I kind of wanted to develop away from this very traditional, because Ashtanga was primarily, the Ashtanga Vinyasa form was primarily developed for young men and to kind of mitigate their massive Kundalini rising. And so I kind of transformed the Ashtanga Vinyasa that I had learned into what I then called Trinity Yoga. And it was really a practice where we incorporated all 8 elements, all 8 limbs of yoga. And that was really my intention. And that was what I started. Then I did the teacher training. And then in 2004, I was heading over to Calgary to do a teacher training in my newly formed kind of company. And I decided I had been working very hard, getting it going after I'd seen you and kind of, various different things. And I decided to go take a mental health day and go skiing. And that was January 25th, 2004. And that's when I broke my neck. And so, yeah, I broke my neck on the top of the hill. I was with a group of people and they got ahead of me. And a couple of them had knocked a bunch of trees down, coming around this really tight little compression trail around a cornice toward the backside where we were going to ski. And anyway, it was just one of those crazy things. My tip caught in a rock that had been exposed, and then the branch of the tree caught my left thigh and catapulted me forward over the edge of that cornice, and I did a hyper kind of flexion and broke 4, 5, and 6 like immediately. And I didn't know I was paralyzed at the time. I don't think one would even put that together. I had often dislocated my left shoulder, because I was a very strong athlete and did a lot of extreme sports. And so I thought that was what was going on, because I couldn't breathe. And generally, when you do dislocate your shoulder, you kind of knock the wind out of yourself, or if you hit hard. So I thought that was why I couldn't breathe. I didn't realize it had something to do with paralysis at the time, in the moment, I should say. And then as I tried to move my legs or my arms to make something work, nothing would move. And I was like, oh, I'm in serious trouble. And in that moment, I knew I really needed to find my yoga breath, because it would be the only thing in that moment that would keep me alive, number one, but also keep me from having a more serious brain injury through lack of oxygen. So that's kind of what I focused on, and that kind of brings us to where I, ended up having something to write about in the book. Yeah.
That's
so intense as a skier myself. It's intense to hear that story. I actually did not ski again that winter in Nelson. I had a ski pass. I didn't go back to the mountain,
Wow.
and I didn't ski for several years after that. Um, and I don't want to make this at all about me, but and uh, your experience rippled out and affected so many people in all quite positive ways, ultimately, I know, but also quite
Mm.
challenging ways. And so I want to kind of get into that a little bit. Your book was, I couldn't put it down. I read and read and read. I loved how you opened it in the introduction, even saying, I'm not a writer and I have a lot to say. I love that you put those two things together because it automatically allowed me to excuse any kind of critical mind because I am a writer and I'm always reading. Like I'm the one that like, oh, there's a typo in this book by this New York Times bestselling author, you
Yeah.
know. So it allowed that to just go to rest and to be very present with your story.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I want to get into that. So you had this injury, your ski people were ahead of you. This other gentleman that you had ridden the lift up with his son came and basically held you and held space with you and for you while you were waiting for the rescue team to come. And
Yeah.
as you said, you had this focus on the breath. And then you got moved and eventually to Vancouver, had surgery, all of these things. And we meet you again in the recovery room. And you've got a breathing tube in your mouth. And I believe maybe both of your daughters are with you at this point. They've come in to the room and you want them to take the breathing tube out. Can you talk us through a little bit why they didn't want to, how you even communicated, and how you had that? I don't even know. It is beyond courage. So I want you to talk a little. What is it that you knew that you could breathe on your own when
Mm.
this hospital in Vancouver, specializing in the kind of injury that you had, did not want to let you do that? What was that experience like?
Mm. So yeah, my daughters came in. I was in recovery and I was intubated, which means that you they slice a little bit of a kind of a half to 1 inch incision in the front of the throat. They had also gone in, so I had had 2 days of surgery at that point. It took them quite a long time to finish and to do the job, which apparently was quite a severe break, obviously. So 4, 5, and 6 had to be completely rebuilt, and then vertebrae 4, 5, and 6 in the cervical spine. And then, in addition to that, of course, they had to, the spinal cord had been completely, they call it severed. There's a classification in spinal cord injury, either complete or incomplete. And when the spinal cord is damaged beyond, sort of anything being left, they will call that a complete and or an incomplete. And so I was classified as an incomplete 4-5 Asia A. And Asia A is the classification that means the most extreme type of spinal cord injury. So you can go from Asia A to Asia E, and those different levels kind of tell the practitioner that might be working with you kind of what things might still be intact below the level of the injury. And so in a 4-5 Asia A complete, there's nothing supposedly going to come back below the level of that injury, which is right about here. And that includes our breathing, because we breathe through our diaphragm to a certain degree if we're really good breathers. But most people in North America breathe predominantly through their auxiliary breathing muscles, meaning the lats, the kind of the rib muscles, some of the serratus, some of the scalenes, and the muscles up in the neck. And of course, the diaphragm is the pump. But most people don't have a good pump going on in North America because they're very shallow breathers up here. And anyway, so when you're intubated, you're essentially the ability for you to breathe consciously is taken away because you're breathed by a machine. And of course, the intubation involves even bypassing the nose and stuff. So when I woke up, to your question, Lauren, first of all, I was absolutely kind of disorientated. And when I figured out where I was and where I might be, because I had no idea, I hadn't talked to anybody at that point yet. And I was covered with a very big mask, and tubes were coming in and out. And that was traumatic enough in and of itself. And that caused a bit of a anxious moment where my breathing increased, and the machine didn't like that because it had a metronome kind of progression for the breath that it was basically programmed to do. And so that set off the beeps. And ironically, in that moment, so too my daughters arrived. So all of this confluence of different kind of things happened. And while it was happening, I'm kind of putting the whole world back together from the pieces that kind of laid on the ski hill where I was last conscious. And I'm like, whoa, okay, I'm here. I don't really know where here is, but once I saw my daughter's eyes, I was then kind of reaffirmed that I was safe in a way, even though I couldn't really put together where I was. And as they came more toward me, so did the terrible recovery room nurse, the male guy that was just an idiot. Oops, I shouldn't say that. Wasn't very nice. So anyway, my daughters come kind of coincidingly with this person, and the machine's starting to kind of calm down because I'm calming down as the safety of my daughters kind of begins. The energy starts to kind of fulfill that anxious place in my being, and I was immediately, I got to get this off. I got to get this off, because I was like, I wanted to talk to them, but you can't, because you're intubated, and so you can't use your mouth. And so that was kind of the biggest, I've got to get this off. But then I was like, I think because I had gotten anxious a few moments before, I was like, I can calm myself down with my breath, but I can't do that right now because I'm fighting this machine. And so a whole bunch of things were kind of sequentially kind of laying down like a compendium of awareness, and also a compendium of, oh, okay, I gotta balance this for that. So immediately, my brain was sharp. I was happy about that, although a little groggy from the medications, probably that they had me on a lot of painkillers, I would imagine. Anyway, I just said to the girls, and I couldn't move my arms. I couldn't do anything. Well, I could, make a sound. And Amanda, my oldest daughter, knew immediately right away that I wanted to get the breathing tubes out. And so it was a bit of a progression from there, having to deal with this not very nice nurse, and then toward someone that replaced him eventually. But I will say that just to kind of bring this story right back around to the present, I had to go into VGH about 3 weeks ago for some test of some sort. And I was in the day clinic, and a woman walked into the waiting room. She had short hair, about 50 plus or so. And she calls out my name, Mary Jo Fetterly, like that. And I look up and I said, yeah. And she looks at me and she goes, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah. And there's nobody else in the waiting room. And then she does this double take for a minute, and then she starts to tear up. And she goes, oh my God, you were the woman in ICU. She goes, I was your ICU nurse. And she just had a complete, beautiful meltdown about, how tender that is to see someone 20 years later, how poignant it was for her to see me so well and using my arms and my spine and having a really good voice and lungs, because then right after that, she said, you were the one that took the intubation route right away. She said, we'll never forget you. We can't even describe what that was like. And she said, you just have this air about you. You knew, you trusted your body, and you knew your body could figure it out. And she said, I've never seen that before, and I've never seen that again. And so I just have to attribute that moment and that process to, because I got the affirmation from her literally 3 weeks ago, because I was kind of, at the time, I was still, when I wrote it, I was like, this really did happen. I'm like, I'd called a bunch of people and asked them for, research on taking people off intubation and various different things. They're like, oh no, it takes 2 to 3 weeks and all that kind of stuff. Anyways, mine took half a day. So, so that's the story of that.
Wow. That's incredible on so many levels. I love that you just got
Her
that
name was Lori, by the
affirmation.
way. I know.
Wow. I love that Lori just showed back up in your life and reflected to you
Yeah,
how that's both incredible. And I want to also add
yeah.
a little disheartening that no one has had that experience since. I know that you have been a big advocate for changes in the rehabilitation world, and you write very poignantly about that. And you don't just write about it, you've been actively involved in a whole redesign of the actual clinic that you were in. You've done all kinds of fundraising and awareness building. One of the pieces I love is when you're talking about that the rehab needs to be more body centered and healing centered, and not this people were kind of going for the moonshot. And you're saying that that is a waste on some level of time and energy because people are struggling right now with where they are, and no one, when they wake up from your situation, is thinking of the moonshot. They're thinking of, how can I breathe on my own? So that's incredible that you got that feedback. And do you feel that there have been changes and growth in that department in the field of spinal cord injury, SCI, as you call it, or I guess it's called in the
Mm.
medical field? Has there been advances
SCI, yeah,
in
yeah,
treatment?
yeah. It's a very complicated question and answer, honestly. And unfortunately, my off the top, I would say um, not enough and no. And I would base that on factual data that um, most people now coming through acute and who are higher than a paraplegic are going to get basically put intubated. They're going to get catheterized right away. They're going to have a whole bunch of stuff done to them, which they honestly they'll put them on a medication, a lot of it, to say that that's going to help with the spasticity and all this other stuff. And so that's hasn't changed, and unfortunately, it's probably gotten worse. The time that someone is going to be in acute has been brought. Like I was in acute for not that long, but in rehab, I was there for 8.5 months. That's been brought back to 3. So they're not training them. They're not helping them to kind of figure out how to use their body anymore. And it's then, I suppose, the only glimmer of hope where some of the progress that I see is happening is in a far kind of off reach where that cause cure kind of piece, the big woo-ha, which is way past that person's trauma and their ability to kind of figure out how to regulate their body in a new way. But they are doing a lot of stuff because neuroplasticity is very much a scientific fact now. And so rehabilitation, although it's all, self-initiated, can that kind of be added in later on? And that's where most of the research is going, like electrical stimulation. I mean, it's still all medical stuff. Like I've been telling them, we can do that through energy. We can do it through sound. We can do it through light, stimulate these nerves and stuff. So it still has a long way to go. There is some progress in the rehab kind of end of it. And honestly, most of it is being driven by people with spinal cord injury. There's a lot of very talented and I would say well-educated individuals that befall a spinal cord injury, and so that's hopeful. But it's not good enough, honestly. And I will say that one of the biggest pieces that is lacking is to address the trauma and address the need for that person to figure out how to live in a body that's altered, with integrity and with a way that continues the setting up the environment for healing. Because although we have something that's maybe technically a condition that's happened to our body. The body's not wrong. The body doesn't need a cure. The body needs the right environment to heal, period. And that's really, not rocket science. And yoga obviously is the science, I think, that knows best of what those elements are. And like, I don't have a catheter. I've been 20 years in a wheelchair, and I manage my bladder on my own. And most people now who are even who could be taught through bandhas and through energy work, through your kind of work, Lauren, because your books are all about this, how to, kind of contain and move that energy properly, wisely. If they were taught that, they could probably pee on their own, and they wouldn't have to spend $50 a week on these stupid little ICP catheters that help them to pee. Like, they have hand function, paras. They could do it. They can hop on a toilet. Like, why are they using a catheter?
Let's talk.
It doesn't make sense.
Let's talk about that, because that is another, in my view, and those of us, I'm going to just be totally honest, on the outside, kind of looking into an SEI, because I haven't had experience with this before. So a lot of this was really new knowledge for me. And I am so gracious and grateful to you for being this guide into this world, which you also spoke about so eloquently, that you didn't know anything about this world either, right? It's like you were thrust into it and you kind of made your way. But you've made your way in some remarkable, I'm going to use the word miraculous ways, as Lori, this nurse, just reflected back to you. So I want to talk about the bathroom thing, because you worked very hard to not have to use a catheter. And that story blew my mind. And I'd like you to share it with us, because I want to get into this energy. And so, maybe a little bit, not all of our listeners will know what bandhas are. But if you were trying to maybe share and teach this to somebody who needed this technique, how would you do that? Let us know how you use these miraculous skills to overcome what medical science said, no, you don't have a chance, stop bothering us.
Yeah. All right. Well, first of all, I think for spinal cord injury it can be used, but honestly, bandhas should and could be used by most people, particularly women who are having pelvic floor issues, incontinence issues in seniors, energy leakage issues. That's kind of a common problem amongst most of the population. And so the bandhas are an energetic valve system in the body. And just like a valve that, is in our veins and brings blood back up the legs to the heart, a bandha kind of collects the energy of the nadis and of all the different ways that we receive energy and utilize energy. So we receive energy through the crown. We receive the energy of the sun all day long, of the nature. We receive energy from from the, kind of the field that we're in. Some of us, maybe receive too much electromagnetic energy or whatever, but we're always receiving energy, and that comes in through the chakra system and through the crown and through our endocrine and all our different systems. So what a bandha, and in yoga, we look at the body as a network of energy, really. And so there's physical networks being very tactile or very anatomical, such as the nervous system, the lymph system, and even the respiratory system. And let's go from the respiratory system then toward the energetic. So as air moves into the body, we're going from very kind of what might be physical, which is air, breath, into very energetic, pranayama. And so when we breathe, we're actually pulling in something very physical and transforming it into a non-physical entity, energy. And that's what we do with everything. And so we need to learn how to use the bandhas, because that really helps us to regulate that non-physical energy and even the physical energy. And so that valve system is what I relied on a lot, called the bandhas. And there are many in yoga. The predominant ones are Mula Bandha, which is at the base of the spine, and then Uddiyana Bandha, which is right here at the solar plexus. and then Jalanahara Bandha, which is right at the collarbones. And actually, Lauren, you use that a lot in your teaching in the thalamus, and it's directly connected to the endocrine system. And it kind of, so the lower bandha kind of allows us to stop or block energy and the vayus from moving down and out the body. So if you think of defecation or menstruation or any of those things, that's a vayu called apana vayu, and that energy force is moving energy down and out. And we also are ruled by the 5 elements of energy in yoga, and so we're ruled by these movements. These downward movement, we have to succumb to that, and so urination is part of that. And so when I wanted to control my ability to urinate, I had to then elicit the bandhas, first of all, to kind of stop the pee from going down into my leg bag when I still had a catheter, when I was training my body back, because of course I was catheterized immediately as well. I had no choice. And so that was kind of the first step that I did, is I had this leg bag with a clear tube, and I made sure I could see it, so I put it right in the front of my leg. And every person with a spinal cord injury who's a quad, or meaning that their injury was higher than T2 or T4, and when an injury is higher than T4, they're going to end up with all 4 limbs and their bowels and their bladder affected by that break in the spinal cord. And so I, was automatically catheterized, as most of them would be. And because of that, I was, my sphincter muscle in my bladder had been weak through those 8 months of the hospitalization. So when I got out into my own turf and I got massaged every day and I started doing my yoga, I'm like, okay, I'm going to start with bandhas here. And so what I did was I started doing kind of like you could think of it like a Kegel. So same, this would apply to a woman who wants to control her menstrual cycle, or her, maybe her birth or whatever. We would use the system the same way. Like I had 2 natural births, largely because of bandhas. Anyway, coming back to the urination, so I would start to Kegel and stop the flow of that urine into my leg bag. And once I could stop my pee completely midstream, then I started to then, exercise my bladder and my sphincter muscles in different ways. But that was really the bandhas that did that.
That's incredible. Do you have, so when I teach bandhas as well, the first thing we start with is at the very gross level, where you can muscularly use the bandhas, and that's the entry to ultimately being able to energetically use the bandhas. Do you have that muscular capacity still, or you right to the energetic?
So that's a great question, Lauren. I didn't have it initially. So I started off with the energetic, with my body memory, knowing what I knew about bandhas and knowing where to go. And we can always, with our consciousness, go wherever we want in our body. And we can also go there through sound. So I would use sound. I would do which is the pelvic basin kind of sound. And then I would start to do the squeeze thing, just, in my mind's eye. And then eventually over time, I then had a physical response, and I would get a little bit of a spasm down there. I'm like, oh, hello. And then that would kind of move toward the next stage, which was then to combine the energetic and the physical. Yeah.
It's amazing. What a self-experiment you have been doing for these last, 20 odd years. Yeah. But I want to get back to what you've shared in the book about these first, few years at least. You take us almost up to present day, but you had such a knowledge, an experiential knowledge of the energy systems prior to this. And there's 2 things that really stood out for me. The one was this wisdom that you had, and you shared it with us. You just said something about this a moment ago, but that the body knows what it's doing, and that you never tried to medicate the stoppage of all of the electrical impulses that were still going through the body. In other words, and you wrote about this, there's drugs to stop what is called spasticity, when the body just kind of flings itself. And you had this wisdom that your body has this wisdom, and you didn't want to inhibit that because of wanting to be curious about where that would lead. So I want you to talk about that. And then concurrently, there's sort of two prongs to this question, because the other thing that you had going on for you, and I don't know if this was before or not, but you had an exquisitely attuned, almost a para energetic awareness. I mean like a seeing through walls, feeling like knowing, having these experiences, seeing energy in a way that is so much more heightened than maybe it wasn't. Maybe you always had that. You always had that sixth sense or that extra sensory perception. But it seems, and you wrote in this book, that it was very heightened. So I wonder if you can talk about those two avenues of energy, this one uncontrollable energy in your body that was still very active even after this paralysis, and this more subtle energy that you were able to pick up in all of your surroundings.
So I'll start by contextualizing both of those energies. And initially, when someone has a spinal cord injury, a lot of the kind of crazy, very errant, sometimes unpredictable energy that you referred to in the first part of your question doesn't arrive right away. It The spinal cord is still too injured, and generally they put a lot of freezing around it and steroids around it so that the swelling stays down. And so initially, the energy of the extrasensory world was very prescient, very very close to me, and it transcended my physical body by a long shot. And I will say that we all have this. It's nothing. I'm not, special or miraculous. None of this is really. It's extraordinary when we can utilize it and tap into it, because it allows us to move out of the ordinary waking consciousness, which we become habituated to, of what we are physically and energetically, into a place where we kind of push the boundary of that and the limitations of that outward toward what it actually is, because we are very energetic, and our physical body is really a temporary state, and it's really not as much. It doesn't take as much real estate up in the body actually as the energetic, if you kind of put it all on a big scale. And so we have a big energy, and we come from this, incredible universal life force that then gets squished down into a physical body. And so initially I felt this kind of this erasing of the boundaries of my physical body. Basically, the lines of my physical body were non-existent. And so my ability to kind of perceive through walls, to smell like way further away than the walls of the building I might even been in, to hear, all those capacities, which are all available to all of us, of the sensory body. But we also have that sixth sense, which is our ability to kind of see, hear, and understand things in a place where we might not do that cognitively. So it's kind of beyond words and beyond our associative mind. And so that was really what was so present for me. And I kind of hovered in that place, been very lucidly, for the first while. And love was really the energy that was the most dominant force, love and light. And they, they would move in like volumes. It would just be like this, and it was like like breathing them in and out. And so that was really the first awareness of my energetic body in such an exalted state. And I can't say that I haven't had that before, but really in smaller snippets, and not so much in a totality like I had it there. Like I might have had, maybe when I did a yoga practice when I was still able, and I would tap into, say, I remember after my first yoga class, it was a really good class. I remember feeling like I was walking a bit above the ground. A lot of people have this, where you see colors more vividly, where you might hear. So we all have it. We just don't exercise it. And I think it's the same with our extrasensory perception. I remember doing some work with Chris Griscom down at the Institute of Light in Santa Fe. And she said, we can all see auras, we can all work with this, but we don't. And we just don't sharpen the pencil of that part of our brain that much unless we're doing a practice like yoga or meditation or something that begins to move our awareness, kind of into that more expansive part of our being. So that's what I would say about that piece. And then the erratic energy of the spinal cord body is really complicated because I think it doesn't have to be complicated. I think it basically, the nervous system is a bit complex, and definitely there are some complexities to my situation that I've had to really figure out over the years how to manage properly. But the fact that I didn't want to take drugs was really about me, you know, recognizing that I've never done this before. I don't know what my body is like paralyzed. I want to know what it's like unadulterated in this state so I can figure out what I need to do or not do. And so it came from that place. I'm very practical that way. And I wanted to, a lot of people would ask me when I was first injured, Mary Jo, how are you going to do yoga now? What are you going to do? And I'm like, well, I don't know, but I know I will practice yoga, but I know it won't be a physical practice right away. And in which it wasn't. I think I say in the book, how I did this, energy practice in my mind where I would see me, I would breathe me through a physical practice. So I think we need to remember we can, even if the energy is erratic, we can find places where we can smooth that energy out. But I will say that the drugs and the various different things for the spinal cord injury, some people feel are necessary because what will happen in the spinal cord injured body, and this kind of brings back to your point, is it's going to go full circle. Once the swelling's died down, once you can kind of ameliorate the trauma from if it was an acute injury and traumatic injury, then what we want to do is we want to then, set up the right environment for healing. And the body will start to do that. And so it'll do it. And how it does that is kind of try and fix the bridge where the bridge got knocked out on the spinal cord. So all of the efferent information coming from the brain down the spinal cord will, kind of be stopped at that place where the lesion is, where the injury was or is. And unfortunately, because up to this point, they haven't figured out how to really tap into the very, important piece of healing that area. There's starting to be good research in that spot. Because what you don't want to have happen is scar tissue. Because once the scar tissue starts to form over that block, like just imagine a bridge being out and there's, two ends of the river. Now it's just, you can't get or there's a dam actually. The bridge got blocked out and we're damming the river. So we have to find a way to move the dam. And the dam becomes a scar tissue. And none of the research up to this point really allows for that scar tissue area to be healed. So what happens then is they start to atrophy, and the person with the spinal cord injury who's taking all the medication is told, when you get spasms, which is really those axioms trying to go past that lesion, and that creates a spasm and also might create nerve pain because the first sign of life in the nervous system is always pain. And so they're told that they have to, dumb that out. And so then what happens is the drug baclofen is used, or gabapentin, and that dulls all that efferent information going down the column. And so basically then the system becomes quite inert, unfortunately. And, I still have, I still get return coming down my body. Like if I've been doing this different yoga practice lately where I'm really getting kind of deeper into holding, a pose for longer. And my nervous system's like, whoa, 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 we're more upright than we've been for a while. And so all of a sudden there's all this new kind of bubbly kind of information. And it's not always comfortable necessarily, but no new growth is, whether it's physical, mental, or spiritual necessarily. And I think we have to remember that. Like, even if you broke your leg, I mean, when you put stress on that broken bone, you have to do that in order for it to heal. So I think we get it wrong in terms of spinal cord injury. I don't think we encourage that enough. And we drug it out, unfortunately. And so we don't encourage both, tapping into that energy system that's non-physical, and also figuring out how to ameliorate in ways that are not pharmaceutical, the physical changes that are going to kind of continue to happen as that body tries to heal itself.
So incredible that you really did have the courage to kind of go against this system, which is reading your book. It seems to me that's in fact what you did, against, enormous odds and challenges to yourself beyond what you had already been given as a challenge. Then the people that are supposed to help you figure out how to move forward in your life are not. And so you've got to reinvent that whole thing as well. Is just massive.
Yeah.
You wrote about researching medical marijuana at a time when it was not on every street corner, which I live in a legal state. And I can't even tell you how many dispensaries there are downtown, and they'll talk to you about every effect of every. But when you were looking for help and support, that was not the case. And yet you really pursued that. And I wonder if you, what kind of pushback you got medically, but also, there is still this stigma, especially in the yoga world. There is this stigma, kind of both sides. One is like, oh, we're all, smoking dope, we're hippie yogis. But then the other side is, total purity if you do any kind of thing. And yet those people that call for the purity are still drinking coffee and wine and all that. But the marijuana somehow is in a different category. Yeah. And so I'd love to hear your experiences with that.
Yeah, great question, Lauren. And really, important, I think, area for us to talk about. I feel a little bit disappointed, honestly, that there wasn't more research in the medical world first before we unleashed the legalization to the recreational world, because it really screwed it up for the people that do use it medically. And so, backing up a little bit, back in 2007, when the spasms got to be pretty intense, and I realized that, something, I had to utilize something, because I couldn't use sound and breathing and, massage and, various different techniques all day long. I had to work and live a life. And so I needed something to kind of give the system a way to titrate those impulses so that they weren't so intense and didn't throw me off my bed or out of my chair, which they could do. The life force is so strong. That also blew me away. I was like, wow, there's so much beautiful energy here. How can we stop it? So anyway, I actually joined the Compassion Club here in Vancouver. And thank goodness there was a really good team of people there that were very, very knowledgeable about medicinal usage. And I learned about the various different strains, the indica versus sativas. And I learned about, how to titrate and dose. And I actually took a course from my somatic girlfriend and learned a little bit more about titration and kind of the whole way to help the system regulate in a way that was conducive to sort of what my demands were. And so that was where I kind of, and initially, unfortunately, it was very frustrating, as you say, because first of all, nobody would talk to me that wasn't at the Compassion Club about, like the doctors at the hospital, they, as much as called me an addict or, someone that was, you're a mother of 2 children, how could you do this, and I'm like, And so there was a lot of stigma, there's a lot of bias, there's a lot of attitude, and there also wasn't a lot of good product available. That was the other problem. Like, there wasn't a lot of indica being grown necessarily, because people love to get high in their mind, in their head mostly, and that, didn't really allow for the indica strains to be very well utilized. And I mean, back then it was illegal anyway, so you'd be lucky to even know what strain you were getting. So what I ended up doing is I contacted the government of Canada. I got a license to grow. In those days, it was you had to have a grower that was growing for you. So I found someone. I have lots of friends from Nelson, which is kind of where a lot of that would happen. So I found someone that I knew, and I said, "Look, I need some indica strains grown, and I don't want it strong." And I didn't know even in those days about CBD. But what I actually was getting, because I asked for all the no, I didn't want the buds. I just wanted the trim. And they're like, okay, yeah, you can have all that. So I was making tea out of it. And at first I had to smoke it because I didn't know how to make the tea. But then I'm like, I don't want to smoke all the time. It was so messy and kind of, too invasive for other people. So I ended up figuring out how to make a tea. And I do that to this day. I have a little bit of cannabis in my tea, and I titrate it. And it's largely a CBD kind of a mixture of indicas. And I do still grow my own now because we can grow 4 plants. So I love growing my own medicine. I've become very knowledgeable about it. And I also help people figure out what to do because it's a bit of a no man's land still if you want to use it medicinally. And I really feel like it needs to be demystified. I mean, it's the most benign, incredible ally for any neurological disorder, for sure. Absolutely for most things, pain or fibromyalgia or any of those kind of chronic diseases. And I revere the sacredness of the herb. I don't call it a drug because it's a herb, and like any herb, we need to honor kind of the usage of it and the dosage and be respectful. I say a prayer every time I use my cannabis, and I think intention has a lot of weight in anything that we do with our body. Whether it's like you do that. I love your the stuff in your books and in your videos about making an intention, and I do that in the honor of the plant and the ability to use it wisely because I feel lucky and grateful for that in Canada. So yeah, anything else you want to?
I love all that, the sacredness, and I agree with everything that you said. I'm curious if you've looked at psilocybin at all. I know that there are some things that that's been used for in actually with paralysis. I wonder if you've looked at any of those studies or done any research of your own.
I would love to do them. If you have any studies, I would love to read them. I haven't ever used them myself. And like I love being conscious, and I don't and I'm very energetic and kind of altered already. And I'm kind of like I don't know if I want to get more altered by anything else, but because I feel like so close to that state all the time. So for myself, I wouldn't I don't see where or why I would use it except for researching it for other people because I do have clients. I do coaching and in the world of disability, and I see a lot of people, and I think those would be more useful in someone whose attitude maybe needs to be just shifted a little bit toward kind of the way that you and I think a bit, or just to open them up to the possibility that there could be more ways for them to approach or understand their state or why they're there where they are. And I see that those beautiful sacred medicinals as in that category more.
I love that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm going to share one article with you offline, and maybe we'll even link to it in this podcast.
Okay, great.
And you just said something here that I want to come to. I had another question, but I'm leapfrogging over it because it was really remarkable to me. And I'm trying to see. I have little sticky notes all through your book here, and I'm on page 267, and the book is it's 311. So I'm almost at the end. So we're like 3/4 of the way through the book before you start to talk at all about depression and feeling those feels. now reading this book all the way through, and I knowing my own propensity towards catastrophizing things and my own history of depression in my life, and then reading your story and seeing that so I want to ask you about that. I mean, this is years later now that you're talking about it in the book, and your daughters have moved out and moved back, and all kinds of things. You've gone through a really intense period of time. You got a concussion. You had, I'm just going to use this word. I don't know if you do, and please correct me if it's not what you use to self-describe, but you had been, I'm going to say, abused by a caretaker in a most egregious way. And now at this point, you start talking about depression. So I want to talk a little bit about that. But can you start with your natural optimism that you write about over and over and over again in the book? Did that carry you through? Like, you didn't wake up from this feeling like, oh, OMG, my life is over. I can't even believe this. Gone into the dark night of the soul. You didn't go into the dark night, and you used that word, dark night of the soul, but we're years later. Yeah. So talk me through that emotional journey and how you sustained yourself for so long, how you didn't sink into a depression right away, which I feel like many people easily could have, myself included. And then was the abuse and the concussion the things that finally push you over to feeling those feels?
Yeah, very good, very perceptive. I feel like that's true, and adding also menopause into that was kind of the funnel of like intensity that I was moving through in that chunk of time. And the concussion was quite serious, and there was two of them. So there was the first one that kind of was the first piece of that chunk of time that kind of started the spiral of me kind of going into a place where I was just, what the heck? And I think we can all do that at times. And the way and the reasons why I perhaps I never spiraled completely into, depression per se, is I have a really strong gag reflex for self-pity, and I don't know why, but I do, and I also have a really strong place in my being that I go to when I do have thoughts that aren't, in line with the spiral of energy that holds me in the best that I can be. When that spiral of energy kind of moves down and funnels toward, doubt or, fear, or whatever those other pieces might be, honestly, I learned, I think, through this, to be really present with it and to be compassionate there. And that was really what that phase taught me. Because at first, true to your comment and your kind of leading into this question, I was, feeling kind of depressed and down and felt like I was abused. But I always go back to my yogic place of, what? Everything in life is a projection and a law of attraction. How is this? How are these things giving me insight into my journey, and how can I heal the karma that I draw toward me in these situations? And what is it that I'm, continually kind of thinking that attracts this into my world? And I know that's a really hard thing for some of us to hear. And I don't feel that I attribute everything to the law of attraction and projection, but I feel like it offers me, anyways, a place of autonomy and sovereignty, because it's very easy to see any of those things as a victim and as something that's happening to you. And initially, that's okay. And that's kind of part of how we move through our healing journeys. We have to kind of be slapped in the face by that, whatever it is, and then kind of rebound out of that and go, oh. And I feel like that was really, like I had to really look at what I saw you do. I know you use a lot of like great tapping things in your method, and I was thinking about one of those things that I did during that time, and it was tapping, and it was tapping around the belief of like I think it was really easy in a situation where you have, pretty much all of your life dependent on other people to manage it to a certain degree, because let's face it, I need a caregiver to get me up and put me to bed, and I know if I put my hand near my stove, it's going to burn because I can't feel and I can't gauge where the heat is. If I go out in the hot sun in the day, I don't have a thermostat, so my blood pressure and my nervous system are going to overheat if I'm not spraying myself down, and if someone doesn't come and give me cold stuff and put a fan on. So there's a lot of reasons why I could be feeling like, oh my God, I'm this is horrible. Like, what a victim of this spinal cord injury I am. And at the same time, there's a lot of places where I could go, okay, there's this, and I can choose to do that. And so I think that's always for me a place where I challenge myself to be, and not in this is, this is just this, because it's never just one thing, what's happening to us. There's a multitude of ways that energy has aligned in order to bring us to that place that we are. And I believe that we, often we don't see it because we don't want to sometimes, or we just don't have that capacity at that stage yet to take that information in. And that's okay. And so I think that was what was happening for me. Like after that first concussion, it was not so good. And the second one, and when the abuse happened with the caregiver, this is when I'm going to come back to the point where I did the tapping and I did some therapy work. And it was the tapping and the kind of the reprogramming of the beliefs that brought me into the idea that I had to experience trauma in order to, advance on my path, or I had to experience whatever. So that was part of that. And I think the other part of it was that as I came through that, the tapping piece, the one phrase, I don't know if this was you or one of the tapping people that I was listening to on YouTube, or even my therapist, but the phrase was, and it went with the tapping, I take full responsibility for my life and my well-being. And when I said that over and over again, I realized I was projecting onto someone, maybe a caregiver, that they had to make me, better because my diaper wasn't right. Or I would maybe project it onto my daughter that because she left home, I was, alone, and now I'm lonely. I'm like, instead of me going out and making new friends, right? So the thing, that the tapping phrase that you had suggested, or it was, I take full responsibility for my life and my well-being, honestly was the thing that turned my path around. I was like, okay, I remember this. This is what I believe too. And if we don't kind of say that out loud, and then start to really see where we're maybe not fully embracing that, is where I went through those years in order to heal that and to come out of that dark night. So that's what I used a lot. And the aloneness, I think I said this in the book, is when all I have is myself, that's all I need. And so it kept kind of bringing it back to myself, and building and developing a relationship with myself that was quite different than the relationship I had prior to that. And I honestly have to say, this was real big for me. It was like I finally started to kind of really just maybe touch into, on the very tip of the surface, this concept that the masters talk about, where we're co-creating all the time with source and with intelligence, and when we can surrender to that, and we go, I take full responsibility for my life and my well-being. It doesn't mean that we're not connecting to that source. It means actually that we're meeting it, and that we're coming there with compassion for the self, because we can meet it. when we don't have compassion for ourselves and we shame ourselves or we guilt ourselves for what we did or we didn't do, or because we believe this, or because we have a cancer or whatever it might be, we then we close off that place of source to a certain degree, and we become like a more like not a co-creator with source, but like a child kind of begging for a handout. And that's not the case. That's not the case. We actually can fully elicit, that energy all the time, as you know. So I think that was really the piece that kind of turned it around for me in that chunk of time.
Wow, it's so fascinating and insightful. There's this piece that you talk about. Obviously, you had a blunt force trauma, right? So we know that word, we know the definition of that, and you've gone through all of this healing, and yet you got to this place where, and I think you wrote it, I don't know if I could find the exact quote right now, but that there was still something held in the body, that there was a trauma held in the body that you weren't even really aware of until you started to work with the heart and the hand so that you could get more hand function. I'd like you to talk about that, because so much of my work is working with people who don't necessarily even understand what that means, that there is trauma held in the physical body. They can understand, okay, a spinal cord injury, obviously that is trauma to the physical body, but to understand that there was this grief and maybe this piece of shame or this piece of hurt. And so much of us trace back our hurt to our childhood when we had our inciting incidents that kind of derailed us. You talk about that, but that this was the first time that it seemed to me that you realized that there was this emotional trauma held in the body that you hadn't been aware of before, that you hadn't yet addressed, and then you started to address it.
Yeah, I feel like, it's a beautiful example of how intelligent our bodies are, first of all, and second of all, how complex the nervous system is, and in particular, the issue of trauma. And so I had these sessions with Mark, and before even Mark, I was doing these incredible sessions with Natalie, who was Donna Rao's partner, and he did biodynamic cranial sacral to the kind of the most incredible degree. And he, before even me knowing about this piece of bracing and trauma being held in my tissue, he was releasing that. And it was in the early stages, like in the first 3 months. And I feel like that really set the stage for me, because I hadn't honestly experienced, I hadn't experienced trauma in my body before in a way that I was conscious about it. I obviously have been, I explained earlier, I dislocated my shoulder, did all sorts of things, rode a horse, broke up with this and that, but never, ever, ever addressed trauma in a way that there was an energy attached to it. And I also didn't have any concept at that point in time, prior to that, of any trauma in my childhood also being held in my body, except in my shoulder, my dislocated shoulder, because I had a feeling that my shoulders had something to do with something childhood. In any case, so when I was doing, the work with Mark and then Natalie, and then after Mark, he had referred me to Judy Russell. And this woman, and then Emily Conrad, I was also working with her. And I think between the two of them, I started to feel how braced my body was. Like, because I they would do these subtle little moves, and then there'd be this whole wave and shudder go through me of release. And they'd go, oh, good, okay, and I'd be like, wow, I don't know where that came from. But then an emotion would come up, or a visual, or a feeling. And in that case, I was working through some really, tender stuff about my daughters. And each time Judy would do this release around the pericardial fascial the fascia around the heart, the whole cavern, my arms would start to, like reverberate out. And then I'd go home and I stuck to Mark's advice by getting onto a futon, flat on my back on my floor. Every time I went after a session, I wouldn't go out and get busy. I'd come back in and I'd harvest that. And my arms would start to open up in ways that I'd never had movement before. And I'm like, whoa. And so that was when I knew maybe, looking at diagrams of the heart in connection to the arms and, anatomically as a massage therapist, I knew that, but I never felt it energetically like I did then. And even my hands would start to, like open up. And for most quads, their hands are like in a little claw. They're always stuck there. And my hands would open and I'd start to feel my fingers and they'd move and I'd be like, wow. So that was kind of the opening of the heart, and it was really related to me healing my grief around this, my grief around losing, the ability to mother my children and walk, down the aisle at their wedding or at their grad, and all these things that were really big, and also my grief at Amanda. I think, moving away, like I was like, we were a little single parent family and I had to work through that. And then I think also the grief of realizing that through menopause, a real significant time in my life has passed. And I think anybody who's, over 50 and who's a woman and who's bore children will or any woman for that matter who goes through menopause is going to experience the opposite of puberty. You're letting go now of a lot of rites of passage and you're moving through a very different, context and reality. You're, at the, the autumn of your life. It's kind of marking a very big passage, if you will. And so I think there was a lot of that there too, where I had to then be open to embracing what was coming and not kind of pushing it away as we often do about aging. So those were the pieces that were healing in the arms and heart.
So I want to come back to something, but first I want to go forward to something. Just looking at you here and, full disclosure for all of you listening or watching, this is literally the first time that Mary Jo and I have spoken since that autumn of 2004. So I haven't seen you, and this is my first seeing of you. 2003. That's right. Sorry, fall of 2003. Talk to me about the miracle of what I'm seeing here, because you are moving around. You've written about the finding your spine again. You're using your arms. This is not what I think of when I see, and you write over and over in the book, you're a quad. You wrote about where the injury is. You, by textbook definition, you don't have use of your arms. You don't have use of your ability to breathe, to, go to the bathroom on your, all of that. And so what I'm seeing here is what I think in the textbook is also called miracle. And so talk to me about that, because you're saying, you write in this book, I'm not special, but there is something special about the tenacity, the curiosity, and the prior skill set that you had that brought you to this understanding of yourself as energy that has, I have to believe, has had a huge part in playing the role that has brought you back so much beautiful movement to your body. Can you share a little bit about that, and if you use the word miracle or not, and how far more you feel like you have to go?
Okay. I love the word miracle, and I believe in miracles, but I do want to emphasize that I'm not doing anything miraculous, because what I'm doing is just utilizing the tools, as you said, Lauren. And so basically what that does is it lays it open for everybody to know that they could do this if they want. And I really feel that's important, because, what I've done, yes, I had prior knowledge. Yes, I had a working relationship with my body that might be a little bit different, but all of that stuff can be learned. Your books are a prime example of that. Like, let's just learn how to do yoga with energy as well as the postures and, all the elements. And so your books. So I would say that to me, a miracle is when I ask and when I pray, and I know it's beyond me in this moment, maybe to imagine it or to manifest it. And through the miracle and the motivation, or sorry, not motivation, but the manifestation of my intention into prayer, I can then possibly be open to a miracle happening. And I've seen that. And I think we need to know that there are miracles for sure. So I feel like that's more energetic, and I don't have anything to do with that. I'm just really opening it up to the powers that be and saying, hey, can you combine forces and help this person heal or do whatever? And maybe a miracle might happen. So that's not me. That's not by me, but through me. Intention and really having the faith and the understand, maybe um, the curiosity to really tap into the life force in a way that our birthright is actually um, offering, is where I feel like I could offer people this idea that they may need to just blindly move forward with these ideas and concepts, because a lot of the times, that's what it takes, is blind faith and trusting in someone like yourself or myself or whatever, who's actually the living proof of what is working. And I think as humans and our brains, that's called attunement. And I believe that we learn best that way. We have to kind of transcend the logical mind often in healing and in these type of modalities, and trust really in what we don't know. Like when we hurt ourselves and cut our finger badly, and we're not, nobody is coming along and saying, platelets go here, blood go there, infection go away. Like our body heals it, right? And we might put a band-aid on and maybe make the environment right, but we don't articulate that, we don't mastermind that. And so I believe that's really where we have to kind of go to when we come to this place of, wherever we are, be it, heart disease or spinal cord injury or cancer, or, having to accomplish an exam or whatever it might be. We need to remember that we can utilize the powers that be to really support us. And then we also have to show up with our intention and our will, and our good spirit, like our curiosity, because really, and our faith that really looks out there and goes, hey, whatever's going on out there, they know a lot more about what to do with energy than I do. So I'm going to follow the lead of that. And I think that's kind of how I got into yoga, honestly. I mentioned in the book a near-death experience that I had. So I think that also helped pave the way for me at a very young age, which is when, I had no prior biases or misconceptions about what energy was or isn't, and or about, being fed miracles or being fed intuitions. I didn't have any bias. And so when that near-death experience happened, I just I chalked it into, oh yeah, I can leave my body when I feel like it. And if I don't want to, I'm here, and stay present. And it was like, I think a clear sign for me that we shouldn't limit ourselves by what we see, touch, feel, and hear and taste. We should remember that energy is much more expansive. And so are we.
It's so beautiful. This whole conversation is reminding me of why I was so thrilled to be able to get to study with you all those years ago. And I see that your wisdom has only expanded since then. I want to ask, I'm not even going to qualify what this question is like, but just a curiosity, because you're a fellow yogi. And we know that the asana practice is to prepare the body for the pranayama practice. And the pranayama practice is to prepare the body to sit in meditation, to come into stillness, and the meditation practice ultimately to lead to the dissolution into the source that you keep speaking of so eloquently. Most of us who are able-bodied, is that the right I don't know how to say what that is. I want to be really respectful. Is that the right terminology? Okay. So struggle quite a lot with stillness, and in asana practices, because you were that kind of a yogi prior to your accident. I mean, you did the poses that are in the magazines. Not just you did them, but you were in the magazines. I mean, you were that yogini. And so very, very strong, acrobatic, gorgeous, Simone Bilesy physical practice, right? At that point, was it harder for you to come to stillness and to meditation? And now, when you have more restrictions put onto the physical body through your injury, do you find it easier to get to that still point, or is it still the same kind of struggle to get everything to quiet down to come to meditate?
That's a great question, Lauren. I believe, and I experienced that, my 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 practice, although limited now physically, yes, is quite, how shall I say, it's a necessary place to allow my body to be able to sit still. So that's similarly the same as you said. I think the asanas very much were designed for the practitioner to kind of move through all of the ways that energy is kind of dysregulated into regulation, so that one may sit in the asana of the masters, which is basically sadhana, to sit in meditation. And so I have to work at that all the time still. I have the same mind that I had prior to my injury. The difference here is that and I still have to I have to outlet energy in this body, or I can't sit still. And I don't obviously want to medicate that out. I have to find ways to kind of let the energy move still, because it's still the same amount of, kinetic energy coming in as everybody else, and it doesn't have the same kinetic output. So that's important, I think, to remember when someone isn't ambulatory or able-bodied, that they still need to get on their bike and ride, their hand cycle or go swimming, or I do lots of different activities. And I really, I actually was part of a research paper that talks about how people with spinal cord injury or disability still need to meet the criteria for fitness. And, it's just, these are our bodies. They need to be respected in ways that they need to be understood. And so physical movement is a really big piece of that. And as you get older, so is, weights and kind of keeping the joints. So I do all that stuff still. I just do it differently now, because I can't sit and do a practice, or stand and do a practice on my mat and whatnot. I do a lot of stuff in the chair that's kind of more like chair yoga, and I'll do that throughout the day. And so I'm the kind of practitioner where I practice all day long. I I don't want to isolate my practice out of my day or even my mindfulness or meditation. So I kind of do it where I can and where I need to. I do have a practice in the morning that's at a regular time, and that's my seated asana. And that's when I'm still kind of in my on my plinth bed, and I can stretch out and do a full seated practice and get into the poses in a nice deep way. So that's kind of how I do it, and I feel like the mindfulness and meditation piece. I set that up in the morning before I wake up, or when I wake up. I first start there, and I just do my intentional work there and my prayers. And I feel like that, sets the tone and brings my focus of attention out of the world and into the energetic and the space of, fluid spirit consciousness. And I just allow that to be for a little bit before I enter into the day. And so I kind of do that a lot now, as opposed to sitting for an hour, maybe in meditation. That's not always as accessible to me, unless I'm lying down. And then I will do it then at night. And that's usually meditation, and maybe yoga nidra.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Did I answer
And
that?
I thank you for Yes, you did. You did wonderfully. And thank you for educating me and our listeners as well. That understanding that the kinetic energy of the body still needs to come through and out, regardless of whatever physical
Yeah,
challenges any of us have,
yeah,
with expressing
yeah,
that. So I really appreciate that, because I
yeah,
think, there's this perception if you're paralyzed, you're just still. And I think you wrote about that
yeah,
you were surprised too, as how much movement there actually is going on all
yeah.
the time.
And not just
Yeah.
movement too, Lauren. I mean, honestly, energetic stuff like I mean, I can close my eyes. I can feel the hum of the nerves. I can feel the palpation of the veins against the tissue. Like we can. Our bodies are pretty active all the time, and they're noisy too. They're quite vocal in ways that we probably don't really fully know. So there's a big spasm just moving through the core, and it just moves right out through the feet. And I might just disperse it by going and just deeply kind of letting my whole solar plexus and that Uddiyana Bandha relax, and then come back. And that's kind of how I would work with it all day long. Same kind of thing.
So, so
We
beautiful.
should do a workshop together,
Okay.
or talk about
We sh-
um, doing energy yoga with people who are just, who are differently abled. That's how I like to say
yes.
it.
Yes, 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 yes. And I talk about a lot, because my teacher has shared this with me and with all of her students. The visualization practices, which you referred to as well, and that visualizing these linkages of energy actually does the energetic work, and makes those connections, and that you can do this all, without physically moving the body. So yes. Can I ask you to read something from the book? Do you have your book handy there? Is that
I
easy
do.
to do, or if not, I can. You do.
Yeah, yeah, I can.
There's this one little section I'd like you
And
to
then I
read, and then
probably
I
have
want to
to.
I want to read it. So page 11. We're right at the beginning, and then I'm going to take us to the end, and wrap this up with some more of your brilliance here. But just page 11 at the very top, you I don't know how you did this, Mary Jo, but you had a journal, or a blog that you kept while you were
Oh
going
yeah.
through this. So this is, if you could read just that, it's two paragraphs right there at the very, right under the Krishnamacharya
Hmm.
quote. You can read that too if you want. What you wrote from your blog there
Okay.
this is on February 22nd.
So the quote starts out, the chapter 2, entitled "Life, Death, Breath." And the quote is, "If you can breathe, you can do yoga." And that's by Krishnamacharya. And the weblog, actually, I dictated these to my daughter, Amanda Rose, at the time. And they got posted on my website. And the weblog is,
And this is just 1 month. This is
there's a
one
big
month
truck.
after your accident.
Yeah, I remember a point just after waking up and literally not being able to lift or move any part of my body from my lying down position. I couldn't lift my arms, I couldn't lift my legs or hands. Anything that I could access, my head, neck, and shoulders, felt disproportionately heavy, large, and like it would always be so. There was no more movement, at least nothing that the human eye could see or detect, nothing outside of the source. This place, a kind of zero point, was and is fascinating to me. There's so much there, a potent and rich bed of pure potentiality, without personality, without desire, ego, identification, or agenda. One of the things I'm understanding is that without the full acceptance after the devastation, without the full surrender of my ego and my identity self to whatever the devastation and loss revealed, I am bound to suffer. Mary Jo,
You
weblog,
had
February 2004.
You had that realization a month after your accident. One of the things I'm understanding is that without the full acceptance, without the full surrender of my ego, I am bound to suffer. That is astounding that you had the awareness. This book is incredible.
So I was
It's difficult to read.
awareness.
I'm not gonna go ahead. Go ahead. No, you go ahead. Say. Go ahead.
I was open, so I was open to that truth coming in because really it did. I think those weblogs were largely just source talking to me and to, anybody that wanted to listen really. Because that I didn't come up with that.
Yeah, it came through you.
I realized it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you realized it. Yeah. It's remarkable. It's a remarkable book. It's a remarkable story. It's difficult to read and beautiful to read. And these are the two takeaways that I came with at the end. And then I want you to talk to us about where you are now. I encourage readers to consider that despite everything we may face, to never give up on life, on ourselves, nor to lose faith in our ability to transform. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional here. And then this. I feel it is fitting to conclude that all we truly want and need is to connect, to love and be loved, and to be witnessed in our essence, our true nature, our humanity, and our divinity. Mary Jo, those are powerful words. Those are powerful sentiments. And you are an incredibly powerful woman. Can you tell us where you are now and what projects are you doing? What other inspiration are you bringing to the world? I know you just published this book, and so you're supporting this book now. I want to support this book. I want you all to read this book. It is amazing. It is beautiful. I have to stop. Go ahead,
Wow,
Mary
I've
Jo.
got some really cool things happening. I love what's going on right now. So I work with the University of Toronto on a project that started back at the beginning of the COVID era, so 2000 and sort of 18, 19. And I was asked to come and learn to be a coach. And they specifically wanted to coach people with disabilities to be able to heal and to live a better life. And I'm like, great. So I started off with them, and I became a what's called a brief action planner coach, which is kind of a more of a cognitive based type of coaching style. And then I then also got asked in the same year, which was kind of interesting, by Rhodes and Vancouver School of Healing Arts to be a teacher on faculty down in their advanced yoga therapy. So those two things coincided, and that position on the faculty led me to also get my life coaching through Rhodes. So I've been doing a lot of coaching, and I'm hired by the local group here, Spinal Cord Injury BC, which is kind of a network across Canada, actually. And so we coach people with various different challenges. And ideally, if they get me, I'm going to tell them all sorts of stuff that they might be able to do to help them. I will say that I am limited a little bit because it is in the context of the healthcare system. But it doesn't keep me back from kind of shedding a lot of the curiosity and light about our conversation that we had today, and in ways that can be helpful and proactive for them. And so I'm doing that. And then because of all of that, a woman from Toronto out of the Research University Health Network got a hold of me. And so we've actually just finished a mindfulness study for neurodivergent people who may be disabled as well. Because a lot of mindfulness and yoga in general, obviously talks a lot about moving the body or tightening the body or releasing or tensing, especially the John Kabat-Zinn mindfulness. So we've actually rewritten the whole protocol for that. And so the first study already got approved through the Neil Squire Society. So now we're working on the second format of that research, which will be to create a training program for people, and this will be mostly for people in the healthcare industry, which is actually great because if it got into the hospitals and acute care and places where people could really benefit from it and get this kind of into their realm and sphere of influence early on, I think it would be really good. So that's going on. I'm the chairwoman of a really cool organization that runs sailing, biking, and all sorts of hiking things out of Vancouver. And we're coming into a really neat phase right now. So, yeah, I'm excited to wake up every day as usual. I'm kind of a little bit of a Mexican jumping bean sometimes. Can we slow that lady down? But honestly, at 66, I don't feel like slowing down, and I feel like there's another book to write. So I don't know. So that's where I'm at.
I love that. I love that. I love this whole conversation. I could go page by page through this book with you, but I won't right now. Is there any last things that you would like to share? I mean, there's so much wisdom in this book and so much beauty. I love your takeaways. I love your vulnerability, and you just share with us from your heart. And I just wonder if there's any last things that you'd like to share with us before we wrap up.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's always the danger of looking at someone like me, maybe, and going, oh, she did it because she had yoga or she had this or that. And I feel like I know a lot of people, by the way, who have done similarly great things with their injury and they didn't have a yoga background. And they just figured out, that they had to embrace this, surrender and embrace it and kind of move forward. And I don't think I'm unique in what I've done necessarily, maybe the approach I've taken. But I want to encourage people to, whether it's a spinal cord injury or no matter what, to remember that there's a lot of ways that we can approach healing. And healing is always physical, mental, and spiritual. It's never one element on its own. And that's really important. Not to be discouraged, because discouragement is really a sense again that that this has happened to you rather than this is happening with you. And I think the witness is important to embrace in whatever way you can, so that you can perhaps surrender into maybe the insights that might come. And then lastly, I would say to anybody, really everybody, to remember that your body hasn't betrayed you when something's gone wrong. And we often feel that way, that, my body's betrayed me and that I don't like my body anymore, or my body's too fat, or my body's this, or my body's that. We are our body, and everything we tell our body is actually who our body becomes. And so every moment we're writing the script for our body, for our physical, embodiment. And every moment we're creating the intention for our future script. And so take that seriously and take it to heart and take it lightly at the same time, in such a way that you find the joy and the reverence and the beauty of your body, no matter what state it is in, because it's doing the best it can.
Thank you so incredibly much, Mary Jo. This has completely confirmed to me that my first hit about you was 100% true. You are the real deal. And I'm just so honored to be sitting with you here today and learning from you, and just so grateful for your sharing of your journey. And I can't wait to see you next week and have dinner with you. Thank you so much, Mary
Me
Jo.
too. Thank you so much, Laura. It's been just remarkable to be with you. And all of you,
Get
wherever
this
you are
book,
out there.
everybody. Get this book.
Yeah.
Get this book, Where Science Meets
And
Spirit by Mary
Lauren,
Jo
they kind of go
Fetterly.
together.
They do. They do. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thanks,
And if they want to get
everybody.
any information, they could always go to my website if they want to get any
Oh,
information on how to
yes.
get that.
Give us your
Yeah.
website. Tell us how to get in touch with you.
Yeah. It's so easy. It's my name, maryjo.com. So Mary with the dash jo.com. That's how you can find out whatever you need to know about the book or what I'm doing. And maybe you'll see Lauren and I up there one day. We'll be offering a course, and we'd love to see you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Blessings on you all. Okay.
Alrighty, energy fans, that's a wrap on another positively charged episode of Energy Works. Lauren, this is the part where we get to use our energy puns.
It's been electrifying, hasn't it, Blaine? We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have.
If you're feeling amped up and you want to keep your energy flowing, be sure to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform.
And we'd love to hear from you. So please take a moment to leave us a review. Your feedback helps us continue to deliver content that resonates. So light up our inbox.
And spark a conversation with your friends to tell them about us. And we'll see you next time on Energy Works.